Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 28 of Blue Leadership with your host, Dennis Nayer. Dennis is a 26-year law enforcement veteran and retired chief from the state of New York. He is also a proud graduate of the 240th session of the FBI National Academy and the 61st session of the FBI LEDA Command Institute. The Blue Leadership video podcast is brought to you by the nationally ranked Master of Science in Law Enforcement and Public Safety Leadership program at the University of San Diego. You can learn more about the LEPSL program at criminaljustice.sandiego.edu. And with that, I'll kick things over to your host to introduce our featured guest.
Maddie, thank you so much. And today's guest is Heather Griffiths. Heather, great to have you here. And today we're going to talk a bit about genealogy and DNA and Heather's role as a deputy coroner with the Sacramento County Sheriff's Office. So before I go any further, Heather, thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Heather's a 17-year law enforcement veteran. She brings with her, in addition to her experience in law enforcement field, a Bachelor of Arts degree in criminal justice with a concentration in forensic sciences. And then also, she actually has an investigative genealogy and DNA background. So that plays really well into some of the things we're going to talk about. So my first question is, Heather, can you just tell us a little bit about your role as a deputy coroner?
Sure. So in Sacramento County, we are a completely separate independent coroner's office. So we're actually separate from the sheriff's department. We're separate from the district attorney's office. We're just a standalone law enforcement agency. Our department head is appointed by the board of supervisors. So our department head is actually a sworn peace officer, but they are the coroner. And then our investigative staff are comprised of deputy coroners. So we are also sworn peace officers. So we are sworn officers, but all we investigate are deaths. And in fact, we have no jurisdiction until somebody passes away. So in our county, right, deaths are reported to us. We don't have dispatch, so those calls come right into the deputies. We get that information. Some deaths are just reportable to us, meaning that we can just have them reported and we clear that call over the phone. But other cases do require us to respond to a scene and conduct a scene death investigation, which would include examining the body, just looking at the scene for evidence to determine what happened to somebody. You know, obviously our goal is to determine what caused somebody to die. So we gather scene information, medical information. We write up reports to give that information to our doctors, who are the ones that actually do the autopsies, to provide us with a cause of death. In our county, we're also the ones responsible for locating and notifying next of kin. So that's a duty that we take on in our county. And then we also give, our doctors give us the cause of death, but we give cases the manner of death. So that'd be homicide, suicide, undetermined, accident, or natural in some cases.
So what would a typical day be like? So in most people in a deputy capacity are on patrol, and they go. So you respond to scenes, the ones that you're called to. Can you just walk us through a little bit of a typical day for you and your colleagues?
Sure. So again, in our county, we're not on call. We work shifts, so it's not like we're getting called from our homes, in the middle of the night. We are a 24-hour agency, but we do work rotating shifts. So we're in the office waiting for death reports. If we have a death report, obviously, again, we're taking that information, possibly responding to the scene, doing the death investigation, notifying the family. We're also in charge of safeguarding property. So sometimes that means securing residences. We also, collect evidence, like if there's drugs on scene, things like that. When we're not taking death reports or responding to scene calls, there's still follow-up work that we do in the office. So for instance, if night shift perhaps had a case, but they weren't able to locate family or get a piece of information that happened over the night shift, then the day shift people would follow up on that work. So we're also helping each other work on our cases and do follow-up work that needs to be done. And then once we have reports back from our doctors, then we're also closing out our cases. And that's when we're giving those cases the manner of death, as I mentioned. So we're looking at what the doctor found in the autopsy, looking at what we found during our scene investigation, doing any follow-up investigation that might be needed to help us accurately give something a manner.
So this is obviously extremely important work, and it's obviously very heavy work. I want to get to the wellness component a little bit. How do you and your colleagues just maintain disconnect to the things that are bad that you see, and how do you compartmentalize it?
And that's a great question. I don't know that we're always super great at that. Historically in coroner work, sometimes we're just sort of looked at as, you kind of all have a dark sense of humor and they can all just handle it. But obviously there's cases that bother us. We're looking at the worst of the worst things. Obviously all of our cases involve death, but sometimes they involve, deaths of families, of children, horrific accident scenes that we see. And I think in recent years, my agency in particular has gotten better at our wellness element. We recently actually created a wellness room that initially was thought to be an exercise room. That was sort of the initial thought of it. But when we actually got together as a team and decided what wellness looked like for our office, we actually created more of a family room. It looks like a living room. There's couches. We have a massage chair, snacks and sodas. But it's just sort of a place where either we can go and kind of sit alone and have a little bit of peace, or we can kind of sit as a family, as a coroner family. Our agency is very close. We're very small. There's only about, a little more than 30 of us. So just being able to sit down and sort of debrief with your colleagues that have had similar experiences and seen similar things. Obviously, when I talk about, investigating child deaths, people can understand why that's hard and why that's upsetting. But sometimes it's not just the child death, that upset you. It's something else that happened at that call that really only another coroner could kind of understand the significance of maybe why that's upsetting or why you're having a hard time with that. So just having a place, and also just having people that are like-minded, that understand what you do, that you can talk to, has really been important, I think, specifically for, my agency and our wellness element.
Yeah, for sure. And as I'm just listening to, describe the typical day, I'm thinking this is just, heavy. And in law enforcement, obviously officers in general respond to death scenes and tragic accidents, but not solely. And to do that as your sole assignment, that's just got to be super tough. And it brings me into my next point. It really takes a very unique individual to be able to do the job you do. And is this something when you were studying criminal justice? And I should say for the listeners and viewers, you're just about to finish up your Master of Science in the Law Enforcement and Public Safety Leadership program here at the University of San Diego. And when you were doing your bachelor's degree, did you know that you were going to take that criminal justice with the concentration in forensic sciences and bring it into work as a deputy coroner?
So I actually, if you asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up, when I was a teenager, it was a Sacramento County deputy coroner. So I was always very career focused. I really knew what I wanted to do from a young age. And when I was much younger, there were certain career paths that I thought maybe I would become a nurse, or I liked religion and thought maybe a priest. I also really liked archaeology and history and things like that. And when I found out what the duties of a deputy coroner were, specifically in Sacramento, because again, we're a little differently structured than some other agencies. I didn't really want to be a patrol deputy. That really wasn't my goal. But I loved the law enforcement aspect of it, but I also really loved the science and the caring that comes with being a deputy coroner. I always tell, my trainees when they're starting out that there's nothing better that you can do for a person than to show up on the worst day of their life and help them. And if you can do that well, that's really a gift. I just happened to know what I wanted to do, fall into that career path and really love it. So everything educationally I did in my associate's degree and my bachelor's degree, putting myself through the police academy, was all really with ultimately that goal of being a deputy coroner specifically in Sacramento.
That's amazing. And it's shown through in the papers and the course you were recently in, just that level of care and commitment that was very evident. What I want to ask you is the DNA is now at the forefront. It's been at the forefront for many years and more so. Now it's back in the national news with the arrest of the individual responsible for the Gilgo Beach murders on Long Island, New York. And prior to that, you had some connection to the work that was being done with the Golden State Killer, which had gone on, I think, for 3 decades or more, maybe. can you just talk a little bit about the value of DNA work, the type of connection you have to it, and what you and your agency do with DNA?
Sure. So really, I mean, I think in today's age, juries, the public, everybody expects for us to be using science to solve crimes. I just think that's basically where we're at in this, time frame. There's, some sayings in the, true crime community of, DNA or it didn't happen. That's really what people expect from us. Just using fingerprints or witness statements really isn't necessarily enough anymore of what is expected in this kind of CSI day and age that we live in. So at our office, we've been using DNA for decades to identify people. Just the normal, sending a sample off to the Department of Justice lab. So they develop a profile, it goes into CODIS, and then, we identify people that way. When we couldn't ID them through other means, through dentals or fingerprints or, other aspects. But in 2018, when the Golden State Killer was identified, initially using investigative genetic genealogy, and then confirmed with additional DNA testing, because investigative genetic genealogy is really just an investigative lead like anything else. When they caught him and identified him, our district attorney's office had a team that was working on doing the genealogy on that particular case. And it really opened the doors for what other cases do we have that we could solve using the same technique. So our office sort of joined forces with our local district attorney's office for them to sort of teach us and train us how to use investigative genetic genealogy with the idea of it identifying our long-term unidentified people. Specifically, their idea was more homicide victims, because obviously our DA's office is interested in, ultimately hoping to prosecute somebody for a homicide. So we started with actually the first case that we used. So D'Angelo, the Golden State Killer, was arrested in, I want to say it was like the end of April 2018. By summer of 2018, we had already started working on our first genealogy case, which were 2 legs that were found in the river. That's all that was ever found of that person. And we had him identified by September of that same year. So considering that he had been found deceased in 2003, 15 years later, it took us a couple months to do the genealogy work to identify him. And since then, we've used it on multiple other cases to identify crime victims, but also just unidentified people that are our cases as well.
What an amazing way to bring closure to not only clearance of an arrest, but to the families of victims. And the statistical impossibility of DNA not belonging to a person was it like 1 in a billion? What are the, I know they always say it's likelihood of not being a match is some extraordinarily high number.
Well, and it depends. When you see DNA reports, it's really based on, I think, how quality of a sample you have. Because when you're talking about forensic samples, they're not always these nice, clean, cheek swabs or a perfect blood drop that's only suspect DNA. So sometimes the DNA match can go down a little bit as when you're talking about your numbers and your percents, just because sometimes the DNA samples degraded a little bit. Or it can be a mixture. So it can kind of affect your quality numbers there. But if you're talking about like really nice, clean, pure DNA cheek swabs, really, the only person that you're going to have that perfect match with is an identical twin. So it's, DNA really, I always kind of say DNA doesn't lie. People lie. So sometimes with DNA, especially with genealogy, you can have issues because when you're building family trees, right? Again, the DNA doesn't lie, but it doesn't mean we always know who our parents really are. It doesn't always, mean that the grandpa we thought was grandpa is really related to us. So that can be some issues with the genealogy aspect of it. But when it actually comes to, the actual matches, DNA is assuming you have a good quality sample. It's, that 99.99999% to leave a little bit of scientific error in there.
Is literally the gold standard. And so if I understand it correctly, so it can degrade not only over time, but so if we look at the current case that's in the news, the DNA was obtained off of a crust of pizza. So whether it's from that or whether it's from a glass, it's going to have to do with the quality in which it's collected and tested, the amount of time, what else it's come into. Is that some of the things that would affect it?
Yes. And especially so, I mean, really with genealogy, like I said, that's more of an investigative lead. Obviously, we're finding evidentiary samples, whether that's, from a crime scene or left on a victim or in a victim or whatever it may be. And then the DNA testing that's done is the same DNA testing that's done when we submit samples to, Ancestry or 23andMe, although it's done by different companies. And then we're building family trees to try to see, I can see who matches are genetically when we enter. Basically, you get a file that you can then enter into a site called GEDmatch, or My Family Tree also allows law enforcement access. So you're trying to identify, your unknown DNA sample. So then you get these matches that are potential relatives that, if you're lucky, maybe you're in a second cousin range. But in the Golden State Killer, initially their first match, I want to say was fifth cousin range. It was very far away. When you think of the relatives that you know of your family, maybe you don't even know your second cousin, but you really don't know your fifth cousin, unless you've done your own genealogy, for your family. So you have law enforcement people that are building these family trees, and then they come down to, because basically you build up, to grandparents of generations of sort of based on numbers of how closely people are related. But then you build down from those grandparents until you find who you think is your suspect, or in our case is our unidentified person. But that's not a match, Then you have to do that additional DNA testing to see if that really is your person. And that's where you're getting your surreptitious DNA samples, like your pizza crust, or you're swabbing, a door handle, or, trying to digging through trash or the glass left at the restaurant to actually get that DNA sample to say, yes, I really think this is who that person is. And then once they're arrested for that crime, then there's typically an additional, actual buccal swab that is taken at the time of arrest to actually, do the real close comparison to your suspect DNA. So by the time you actually have an arrest, you've had multiple, DNA tests happening over time.
Yeah, and there's so much, it seems like it's just that final piece of the puzzle that puts everything together, because you're obviously looking at laws and where expectations of privacies begin and end, and getting warrants for things where needed, and doing stakeouts and the long, arduous portions of it. And I think at the end, it's got to be an amazing feeling to get your match.
It really is. And for instance, the first case that we did, the legs case, that we mentioned, when we got to the person that we thought it was, and it's, so, I mean, most people probably haven't gone on to GEDmatch, and the public has access to it. So if anybody actually has ever done their DNA through Ancestry or 23andMe, I encourage people to upload their profiles into GEDmatch, because it's very interesting to see who you match with, genetically in those sites as well. But GEDmatch had this tool that you could use that was an eye color predictor. And when I did the legs case, again, all we had was legs, so I didn't know anything else really about how this person looked. It came back with this really yellow hazel eye color that I had never seen anywhere. And I thought, well, that's ridiculous, This tool doesn't work. So once we narrowed down the family, that person's nephew actually came in to provide me with a DNA sample for that confirmation DNA testing. And he walked in and he had yellow hazel eyes. And I knew we were in the right place. So it's just, the information that you get, but then also, yes, once you really have, obviously that DNA came back positive and it was his uncle, that real confirmation testing is very satisfactory, especially for the weeks, sometimes months that you put into trying to identify these people.
Yeah, that's amazing, that story. And I kind of felt that's where I was going to when you said those unique eyes, and it actually came true when the nephew came in. If there's anything you would want, obviously what you do is at a 30,000 foot view because you have such a specialized knowledge. What is it that you would want all of law enforcement to understand to make it, I don't want to say easier, but you to have and your colleagues to have a better chances of closing cases out with proper identification when it comes to DNA? Is there any information that they should know?
I really think, especially when we're talking about cold cases, it's really just saving your evidence, preserving it properly. I mean, there's so many cases that potentially could have been solved, but, the DNA technology wasn't there in the 70s or even the 80s. We couldn't have really had that forethought of where we would be now. So there are some cases that we probably could have solved if we had saved things. I think we're very lucky in Sacramento that we've actually, as a county, even local PDs, we really save our evidence. We really don't throw a whole lot of stuff away. So specifically, even my agency, we've had a lot of genetic information saved over the years. We keep DNA samples on everybody that comes to our office. So we've even been able to help on some other genealogy cases that weren't necessarily identifying, our unidentified people, but, the DA's office will give me a court order saying, hey, we've identified somebody, we think our suspect actually died in your county in, 2002. Do you have a DNA sample? And we do, because we've preserved that. So not only have we preserved our unidentified samples in hopes of identifying people later, but we've also preserved other evidence that has been able to solve other cases. So it's really just, again, saving that genetic information, because, we know where we're at now, but where we're going to be 5 years from now, 10 years from now is going to be even leaps and bounds, probably from what we can even dream of, even now with the technology we have. And also just really appropriately documenting information. Every little fact can really be helpful. Just witness statements of, I think the suspect, even though we don't know who they are, but they looked about 30 or 40. So when we're doing genealogy, we know we're looking for somebody that was maybe in that age range, back in 1980 when the crime occurred. All those little facts and documentation, you never know how it's going to help somebody 30, 40 years later.
Yeah, and the Golden State Killer case is a prime example. Obviously, the investigators weren't thinking DNA. Obviously, it's good that they saved whatever evidence it was that had the DNA on it, because without that, that would have still likely gone unsolved.
Yeah.
You mentioned right now, one of the things I wanted to bring up as an ancillary topic was the importance of documentation and writing well and all that. And you bring some extraordinary writing skills to the LEPSL program, and they stood out in the recent course you were in that I was teaching. And do you think, was that always a natural skill for you, or do you think that evolved over time because your role requires it? Do you think that helped shape the way you write and document and detail writing projects?
I think, it's definitely, I write every day. We're writing coroner reports every day. And I don't think naturally I'm a very strong writer. In my opinion, I was always very much more math and science were my skill sets. But I sort of attack writing papers like I do, like a coroner investigation. It's, okay, well, what is the question, right? What am I trying to answer? What information can I find? So I'm gathering my evidence, I'm gathering my facts. And then how do I regurgitate this into a story that makes sense for the reader? In coroner work, right, we're getting information from law enforcement. So we have that, law enforcement talk where they're talking in penal codes. And I always, say, use your words, not your numbers, because I don't know what you're saying. So we're, kind of interpreting law enforcement words. We're interviewing witnesses and families, but we're also talking to doctors and gathering medical information and having to put that into reports. And we're having to put that together in a way that not only our doctors, can read and understand what we got from our investigation, so they, know the facts when they're doing autopsies, but also the public or the district attorney's office, or, we kind of have to be able to gather and interpret all that information into a story that makes sense for what happened. And I think that's kind of how I try to attack my writing in these courses is, really what information can I find? Because maybe I have an opinion about something, but if I can't cite it and I can't source it, maybe it's just still an opinion. Maybe it's not even, real, because the evidence that I find suggests something different. So I and thank you for the nice comments. So I hope that approach has at least helped me, because that's just sort of how my scientific mind works a little bit when it comes to my writing.
Yeah, it's very transferable from your work to the academics, because you've honed that skill extremely well. So thanks for explaining that. What I want to ask you is your career aspirations for you. It's clear when you talk to anyone who loves what they do and is passionate about it and is committed to it, which you clearly are. As you continue on your career, would you ever have any different trajectories you'd like to go within a coroner department?
Yeah, as I said, our agency is really small. So there's not a whole lot of room all the time for promotions, within our agency. We only have, 3 supervisors. So whether a promotion is in my future, I'm not sure. I will definitely retire as, from my coroner field, whether that's, my agency or if I ever, move on to lead a different department, who knows? I love teaching. I've taught some classes for post. Right in California, we have our peace officer standards training. So I'm somewhat interested in, pursuing more teaching avenues because there's not a lot of people know a lot about death investigation. So even, homicide detectives and patrol deputies, there's a lot that can be learned from understanding the coroner side of things a little bit better. And also just so we can work together and, provide better investigations. So I think that's probably, open for where my path may go.
Well, that sounds like a very high quality path and a very worthy pursuit. And if more people want to get into that particular genre of law enforcement, what would you say? Who should consider that? Who are the type of people that you'd like to bring in, and who, as maybe the listeners and viewers, if they're contemplating a career change or entering, what is it that you would want?
I think that one of the main things is just obviously being very kind of investigation driven, of trying to find clues that tell us what happened with somebody. Obviously, we have a deceased person that can't tell us anything about what happened to them. So we have to glean that information from looking at a scene, from looking at changes that happen to our bodies after we pass away, from medical records, from witness statements. So just having sort of that inquisitive mind is incredibly helpful, but also being able to speak compassionately and use empathy in dealing with people. Every person we talk to is really having the worst day of their life. And talking to grieving people is something that not everybody can do, of, having to interview a mother that's just lost a child while she's, heavily grieving. But we train people, when they go through their training program, to be able to kind of use different techniques to talk to people. So I just think it's really, again, the inquisitiveness, and then also just really having that kind of calming persona that can have that compassion to be able to talk to people. There's a lot of cases that we respond to that, maybe law enforcement's already been at, and because even though we're law enforcement, we're sort of the safe version of law enforcement. So sometimes we'll even ask, if it's nothing criminal or necessarily suspicious, officers to leave so we can actually, sit down and kind of talk to the family, just because we have a sort of a different tone, a different way of talking to people to get information. And sometimes people, reveal things to us that they won't reveal to other law enforcement officers. It's just, again, that sort of more compassionate side of law enforcement, I think.
I agree. Compassion, an analytic mind, a desire to want to bring closure and justice for victims. This is I think the strongest way to close this episode. And I just want to say thank you for what you do. It's huge. Even for me, I learn a tremendous amount when I hear from someone as yourself that really describes such an important role in the profession. Maddie's going to come in and close us out, but is there anything you'd like to end with? Any final thoughts on DNA, on career pursuits, on the life and work of a coroner? Anything that you'd like to add?
I just think, again, career path-wise, find something that encompasses what you love and do it, and, try to keep your wellness in check so you can do it well and continue to do what you love. Taking care of, yourself physically and your mind is very important. And then also just, again, gathering that information, preserving evidence. You never know sometimes what cases, seem basic, but can turn on you. So always, making sure you're gathering proper information and preserving everything you can, because again, it could be probably not me, but somebody else 30 years later trying to solve the crime you investigated. So the things that you do now really can make a difference in the future.
Awesome. Heather, thank you so much. Perfect way to close it. Hopefully Maddie's going to jump on here in a second and take us home.
Absolutely. Yes, that was an amazing conversation. Thank you so much, Dennis and Heather, for your time today. And to our viewers, we appreciate you taking time out of your day to meet the law enforcement heroes and leaders who are part of the MS Lepsol family. If you would like to watch previous episodes of Blue Leadership, you can find them on the video tab of our Facebook page or by searching USD Blue Leadership on YouTube. Thank you, everyone. We will see you next time.